Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into immaculate communities. I am your host, John Brackett. Welcome to the show. I have here another great guest. His name is Bill Ham, someone who is an owner-operator out of the Atlanta, Georgia market. I know that's a really hot market, a market that, I get a lot of requests from various people throughout the country and in different parts of the world, for that matter, wanting to know a little bit more about that marketplace. And we have an expert in Bill Ham. So welcome to the show, bud. Really excited to have you on and excited to get the conversation going.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So, over the past couple of years, you've been able to acquire and operate roughly 1,100 units. So you have some really good experience in the multifamily space. You are the chief executive officer of your company, and you've been in this space for quite some time. So here's something that I thought would be really interesting, right? Because there are three areas that you consider strong suits, right? One is creative financing for real estate. Another is you're a creative problem solver. And then, of course, you have your new book that's out that I want to share with our audience before we get going, which is Creative Financing for Real Estate.
Yeah, Creative Cash. Yeah, it's on Amazon. Creative Cash, that's right. Launched that just a few months ago. It's out. We've done real well with it. It's about getting results in real estate through creating offers that create value. And that's sort of one of my big things is I always like to try and show people how to create value for someone else in the real estate business. And that's how I got started early on. My first 402 units I did without any traditional financing. So meaning not going into a bank or to a lending office qualifying for loan buying real estate. I got into all those deals either through seller financing, lease options, debts, credit cards, you name it. I got into real estate through some sort of crazy way of doing it, but always by creating value for someone else. And so that's what this book is about.
Hey man, I really love that. So let's talk on that. Okay. Let's use that as our topic for today, because I think it's really timely, especially in the market that we're in right now and the market that we're going to be in, 3 to 5 years from today, right? The beauty of real estate is it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, and consequently it creates a massive amount of opportunity, especially for those that can see this business through the lens of opportunity, rather through the lens of problems, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that the concept that you just shared, which is, I like the way that you phrased it, and I hope I don't butcher it. It's presenting offers of value, right? So explain that a little bit in detail, and then we'll kind of dissect that.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the easiest ways for me to explain it is what I call the SPY technique, and that's in the book. It's an acronym, and it's SPY. It stands for Seller, Property, You. And what I teach all my students is to look at deals from that perspective. Start with the seller. What motivates the seller? What problems can we solve for the seller? Is this offer gonna be of value to the seller? Okay, next, let's stop and look at the property. What's wrong with the property? Is my offer going to solve the property's issues? Maybe it's deferred maintenance or occupancy or who knows what. And then lastly, we look at ourselves. And that's the utmost important part about analyzing a deal, is using that technique there, because what I have found is that most people that are not successful with creative financing kind of run the reverse model. They say, what's good for me? What do I want? What creates value for me? And then they look at the property, and then almost as an afterthought, they think about the seller and, I guess I better solve, create some value for the seller, this kind of thing. And it doesn't work. Look, a good deal is 90% seller, 10% real estate. And so that's why if you don't have a willing seller, you don't have a deal. And that's why I learned to kind of create the SPY technique. So start with your seller, then move to the property, then move to yourself lastly, and that will increase your probability of closing a deal with creative financing 100-fold easy.
Okay, great. So you said something that I find pretty fascinating, right? And that is that 90% of the opportunity or the deal is seller driven. So what that tells me is there has to be a motivation. The seller has to be fairly motivated to take action.
Correct.
For there to be a possibility of doing something that's outside the realm of conventional, right?
Correct.
And so talk a little bit about that, because I think that there's some golden nuggets there to be had. You can have a mediocre offer, maybe, but you can have a really, really motivated seller.
Right.
And because of that, there's just more, I guess there's probably more, what's the word that I'm looking for? There's more
motivation.
More desire on part of the seller to actually get into a conversation, right? And to try to solve their problem, really.
Right.
So how do you go about doing that in your offer? Maybe the first, how do you qualify for motivation? And then how do you use that to write your offer addressing those motivations, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, you look at, okay, let me back up and give a broad answer. Don't look for creative financing deals. Okay, that's my first number one answer. You do not go looking for creative seller financing, master lease options. You don't go looking for any of these deals. You look for deals in the same manner you always look for deals. If this property works, the numbers work, and everything's fine, you can go down to the bank, you can get a loan, you can buy the property, you should. Creative financing is used when the seller has a problem and traditional financing doesn't immediately solve that problem, all right, i.e. a distressed asset. If we're talking about multifamily, it might be low occupancy. It could be deferred maintenance. Those are a lot of the reasons that you might not be able to just go over to the bank, put some money down, get a loan, and get the property done, because the seller has allowed the property to fall into disrepair or do whatever it's done, and now they're motivated. So that's why I kind of want everybody to understand, don't ever go out to a realtor or a seller or someone like that and say, hey, you got any seller financing deals laying around? Hey, any lease option deals out there today? You're going to come off as you don't know what you're doing. You're going to come off as you can't close. You don't have any cash. None of those are good ways to start a conversation with a new seller or a realtor.
Any lease option deals laying around?
No. Don't do it. That's a bad idea, right? You come off as not knowing what you're doing. So the idea, again, like I said, you just analyze deals. When you analyze the deal and the numbers don't work, first, we have to ask ourselves, why don't these numbers work? Okay, 90% of the time, it's just overpriced. Creative financing does not solve you paying too much for real estate. That's a whole complete different problem seller financing does not solve. So this is not about you getting deals done while just overpaying for real estate. That's not it. So 90% of the deals, we know they're just overpriced. Move on. Don't worry about it. The few that you come to and you say, okay, gosh, the real estate's not that bad, but the numbers don't work because fill in the blank. Then we look at what kind of offers we can pull out that might solve that problem and then might solve the property and our problem. So it starts really with talking to that seller. I love the question, what do you want? What do you want? A lot of times you would be amazed that money is not actually the motivation behind that seller selling that property. Many times it has nothing to do with money. They have some other ancillary problem. The only way they knew how to solve it was to put the property on the market and sell it. Inheritance, that's a big one. What would be an example?
What would be an example of
inheritance?
Yeah. Okay.
Right. What if a spouse dies? And all of a sudden leaves a family member real estate they didn't know how to deal with. They didn't know how to operate. And all of a sudden they're the new owners and landlords and they're going, oh my gosh, what do I do? This is unexpected. Those are great scenarios. What if a seller is just burned out? They're just tired of trash toilets and tenants and they're ready to go to Tahiti or something. They don't want to deal with it anymore. Burned out landlord. That's a lease option all day long, right? Properties that have seller ran out of money. That's another biggie. May have gone in and started renovating units, didn't run their budget correctly. Now they are out of money, don't really have a renovated property, or they've allowed the property to fall into disrepair. They've been collecting the cash flow and never putting it back into the asset. And now all of a sudden they've got a bunch of capital expense needs and they just don't have the money. Those are all real reasons why a seller might be motivated to do one of these types of offers.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate the feedback. So SPY, seller, property, and then you.
Correct.
So you talked a little bit about, structuring an offer based on the motivations of a seller. So what are some of the questions that you go in and ask that have proven to be, great qualifying questions for you?
But besides, what do you want to always kind of ask that? Like what, why are you selling? We all like to ask that question. I think we usually get some kind of half-baked answer when you ask that question. So I do ask, why are you selling? But, sometimes you get a straight answer. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to kind of ask the same question in different manners. And I found that sometimes you need to ask the question about 3 times to sort of maybe get down to the real answer. So I may sort of find a couple of different ways to say, why are you selling? And ask them periodically, what are you going to do with the money? I love that question. Listen, with the sale, you're probably going to really put back a lot of capital. You got any real plans for this money? You've got to have some great investment that you're going to move all this money over to. All right, see what I'm doing? I'm fishing. I'm kind of finding out that, what's your motivation with the money? And if they say, well, no, I really don't have any plans for the money, or no, I don't know what I was going to do with the money. Oh, well, then did you ever consider seller financing? See, that would actually stop you from, taking this giant capital gains hit, paying all these taxes. You could continue to collect money. Have you ever considered that? So things like that, it's like, just find out what motivates the individual. It's an art. It's probably more art than science, but you're just going to have to talk to them and find out what truly motivates them. And if you can't find out, then screw it, make an offer, see what happens. Why not?
Okay, cool, man. So now let's get to the property.
You got it.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about the property. So what are you looking for? Okay, let me ask a question a little bit differently. Okay. When you talk about making an offer that's right for the property, are you talking about making sure that you structure an offer that supports the economics of the property? Or are you talking more about, are you talking more about the economics of the property, or about the condition of the property? Or both?
All the above.
Okay.
Yeah, all the above. Yeah, absolutely. Condition is a biggie, and I'm glad you hit on that one. Properties that are starting to get old, and I'm saying old, that's stuff that we see built in the 1960s, the 1970s. Those properties are starting to have repair and maintenance issues, capital expense issues they've never had before. That plumbing is really starting to get old. Those roofs, the electrical, a lot of infrastructure is really starting to get old on those buildings. And what that's going to do is that's going to make the lender make you put up a lot more money at closing in escrows. That'll kill a deal. So that's something that I really pay attention to, is trying to make an offer that will allow me to get in on that property if there are repairs and things that need to be done without coming out of my pocket too much money. And that's why I don't want to go to the traditional lender, because they're going to make me escrow a ton of repair money. Well, I got an idea. What if I go to the seller and I say, hey, listen, you've kind of got this asset. It's in disrepair. Seller finance that to me. Instead of putting money down, I'll put money in to the property. So instead of giving you, John, this down payment money, I tell you what, I'll put it in escrow. You can see it and I can see it. It's there. And what I'll do is I'll take that money and fix up your property. And that way, worst case scenario, you take the deal back from me. Hey, at least it's renovated with money you never had to spend. So I try and find deals and sellers where I can limit the amount of capital that I have to bring to the table, which limits my overall risk and ease of getting into the deal, right? So the easier a deal is for me to get into, the higher the price I'll pay, the more value it has. The harder it is for me to get into, the less value it has and the less I want to pay for it. So that's kind of how I think about that. And so I look for properties that I love renovations. I love doing value add, bringing assets up. But I like to try and do it with as little money out of my own pocket as possible. I'm not saying no money down. I'm saying as little as, right? And so a lot of times I do bring a fair amount of cash to the deal. I just spend it on the property. Or one of my favorite techniques is to try and get the property to renovate itself. If you can defer a few payments, like say maybe 3 or 4 payments in the beginning, then what you can do is go in and collect all the rent from the property. With no payments, you can use all that rent to renovate the property itself. I love doing that. I've done that several times. So try and use that rent money, make that property renovate itself.
Yeah. So, financing with operational cash, right? Okay. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Please.
Okay. So, a lot of what you said, man, I see some application. I think where things start to become challenging. And so I want to play devil's advocate,
Sure.
Where things start to become challenging is in markets like we are today, right? A lot of cash out there in the marketplace. Interest rates are low. Excess buyers Okay. It's not that there's a limited supply of product to be sold. I think right now there's just there's a lot of cash chasing the same opportunities, right? And not all cash is treated equally, meaning not all of that cash has the same level of sophistication or expertise, right? And that's just the nature of every single market.
Sure.
Which is really great. And not all that cash is chasing the same opportunities, right?
Right.
So with that being said, in a market where there's excess cash, okay, a lot of cash chasing the same opportunities, seller financing usually falls down a little bit because a buyer more often than not, or a seller more often than not, would want to get paid off. They would want all that cash up front, right?
Right.
Less risky to a seller. You and I
Sure.
would likely do the same thing. Maybe. So with that being said, okay, in this market, where are the seller opportunities in this market? And what is that proposal? What is that presentation?
None.
Okay.
You're being way too polite. This does not work at all in this kind of market cycle. And it does not work at all in the last 3 to 5, 6 years back in the market cycle. So first thing we have to understand is market cycles and their nature to begin with. So we have rise and fall in market cycles. Over the last 7 years, counting back to today, the market has been in a rise largely. Therefore, creative financing really had no place because you're right. If a seller had a problem, how do they solve it? They throw it on the market and they get asking price plus $1 and they're out of there and they're already problem. Exactly, which is exactly why I brought the book out now, because that's not the market cycle we're about to go into. And so I've been through this. Like I said, I've been here almost 16 years now. I've seen the market cycles, a lot of them. I know what the ups and downs are. What you want to do is watch your lenders. Lenders always control the market cycle. So there's an old adage, a bull market does not die of old age. It's murdered, right? So a good market going up doesn't stop until the lenders stop it for us. And they stop it by pumping money and stopping creating so much allowable debt in the market. So let's look at Fannie and Freddie right now. Don't worry about interest rates. That's an illusion. Who cares about interest rates? Everybody gets stuck on interest rates. How easy is it to qualify for that loan right now? You see in the news, Fannie, Freddie, they're all tightening up criteria. They're lessening investment money. Watch your debt. And they always trigger a down cycle. So what's about to happen is several different things. We've got what I call the Capex Tsunami. All right. That's a lot of repairs and maintenance about to show up on these older assets, 60s, 70s. You've got infrastructure issues. You've got plumbing you got to replace. And now we're talking about a compressed cap rate or really high prices. Okay, that's a double whammy. So you're telling me I've got to buy a property that really isn't going to cash flow at the same time I know has a tremendous amount of infrastructure problem that's about to happen. And let me take this over here and try and get a mortgage on it. Oh, did I mention COVID? You've got 20% of your tenants not even paying the rent. How do you think that's going to go over there at the bank? I don't care what people are buying right now. It's a bubble and it's about to break, and the lenders are going to be the pin that pops it. When they do, that's when creative and seller financing and lease options and things like that become prevalent. That's why I brought the book out right now, because I know the market cycle we're about to go into. And to your point, no, it has not worked readily in the past. And as of this afternoon, it is still somewhat of a challenged model. That's about to change.
Man, that was freaking hilarious, man. As of this afternoon, huh?
Yeah, right now, it's a little tough.
Hey, so I think there's still a place for seller financing, even in a market like this, right?
There is. Less so.
Yeah, but I do believe there's application. There always is. I just think a lot of it has to do with how you're presenting that, and especially your understanding of the potential tax consequences, right?
Yep.
I think I'm sorry?
SPY.
You know what, man? I'm so sorry. I didn't hear you.
SPY. That's the technique. SPY. That's the answer. SPY. Use that. Right. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I do think there is a place, but for sure a little bit more challenging. I have a buddy of mine out in Washington, and I think last year they closed 3 properties in Washington, Washington State. with seller financing, maybe one in February, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But, Washington, fairly competitive market.
Yeah, it is.
I'm sure they were paying a little bit more, for those properties and structuring,
right.
Seller carries as part of that accommodation, right?
It's coming. Watch your lenders. Again, that's the takeaway. Just watch debt and watch how easy it is or is not to qualify for debt. So when you start seeing debt tightening up the leash, that's an indication that the first round of real estate that's going to suffer from that debt pullback are distressed assets. And that's where in the past,
so what is the trigger for that? What is the trigger for lenders tightening up? Pandemic aside, right?
Pandemic aside.
Anomaly. So putting pandemic aside, what would be the trigger that you foresee tightening up the credit markets or the debt markets?
Too many transactions. Too many transactions, too much volume, too much trade volume. They're getting nervous at our underwriting. At the fact that we're compressing cap rates to an unreasonable level is making debt nervous. It's a supply and demand. There's way too much supply. There's way too much demand. They don't like all that. So they're going to start pulling back on supply. It's when everybody can qualify for a loan, it's no longer a good idea to get a loan. And that's what the lenders will say. They'll say, whoa. There's way too many people out here that are new. There's way too many people out here that don't have a resume. There's way too many people out here that don't have experience. This is making us uncomfortable. We need to start backing up. Freddie Mac, 3-year resume, like-kind experience. They didn't have that before. Go apply for a Freddie Mac loan for commercial property. You now have to have 3 years experience. That's new. They haven't had that before.
3 years experience. 3 years experience in what? In the
like-kind asset. Whatever you're trying to borrow again.
Yeah, that's fairly. I don't think that's out of the ordinary.
That's actually relatively new. No, that's a little more new that they're starting to really look at a borrower's resume. And if you don't have a lot of experience in that type asset, and I'm not talking about houses, but like as soon as you get into commercial, they really started to look a lot more at the borrower and the borrower's criteria. And so that's where I'm kind of saying they're starting to tighten up. The next thing that I'm predicting, now this is a prediction, but the next thing that I think you're going to see is lenders forcing us to put up a lot of capital expense reserves. When the lender goes and looks at your property, they send out what we call for the third party reports, the 3 of them, the appraisal, the physical inspection, and the environmental inspection.
Right.
It's the engineer that's going to come out on that property and walk through that 1963 construction and say, gosh, that's kind of rotten wood, and there's holes in the parking lot, and the plumbing is old. You've got Square D or Zinsco breaker panels. You've got not a problem. And he's just going to go along, and he or she is just going to go along and make a long list of all these items, turn it over to the bank, and the bank is going to say, hey, that's great. You just need to go ahead and put $1 million in escrow to take care of all these repairs.
Okay, but let's talk about why they do that, right? Let's talk about why they do that. There are really two reasons. Because it's going to be important, right? One is in the event that they have to take that property back or that asset back, okay, the bank is not shelling out the money, which of course impacts their returns.
Correct.
Right? The other aspect of that now, especially now that we're talking about affordable housing and safety and quality housing, the lender also wants to make sure that the operator, especially since usually it's a government guaranteed loan, right? Our tax dollars are supporting that cheap debt, that we're not putting residents or tenants at risk in those government subsidized loans, right?
That's it.
And so those are usually the two reasons. But I think that's kind of an important component to share because there are going to be folks listening out there that may not fully understand why, right? Like why
would they do
why a lender would send out an engineer, and do a condition study on a property. In many cases, assign cost to that so that the lender has an understanding of
what they're lending on.
Yeah, what's it going to cost, in the event that they take it back, but also to make sure that their underwriting is not flawed, man.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really big one as well. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. All right.
Okay.
So I find what you say, man, pretty interesting, right? Kind of fascinating, right? Because you spoke of two scenarios in the debt markets, and that is that hey, we have a Capex Tsunami coming due. Okay, and it has 2021 on it, maybe. Okay.
21 to 2025, 2026. That range.
All right.
Yeah. That's the window.
So, hey, man, I got to tell you a funny story. I don't mean to digress, but I had a Harvard economist on probably about 3 months ago, right? And and I kept teasing him because he couldn't give me a specific date. I always tease economists because I always make the comment, you know, they're really good at staying in the middle. and so before he started talking, I said, okay, we're going to make a rule now before we start the show that there's no middle ground. Okay. You have to, you must express an opinion.
2023 is going to be that's going to be the real belly of the beast. I think 2022 and a half to 2023.
Oh, okay, cool. So let's talk about that, right? So, you know, we have this potential Capex tsunami. I think some of that is going to be mitigated through underwriting, to your point, especially if it's agency financing. But what I find a little bit more interesting, man, from the viewpoint of looking for and acquiring good opportunities, or at least opportunities that make sense, right?
Sure.
Is using the credit markets or the debt markets, however you want to position that.
Sure.
As maybe a leverage point to start navigating your way through deals or markets rather, maybe a better way to say it is markets that may have more opportunities than other markets, right? And so one of the drivers behind that would be, for example, usually it's not the community banks, man, or the regional banks that adjust their lending criteria, but rather the agencies first, right? They usually lead the markets for, I think, obvious reasons, you know, tax dollars, okay, trying to keep losses low. But frankly, they're just a lot more competitive, right? The pricing there is more competitive because those dollars are guaranteed, and they're selling that off, right, to a secondary market with a guarantee. And so consequently, they can charge less for that, meaning offer out a more competitive rate because there are guarantees associated with that money, right? So normally that's kind of where the lever starts, okay, is rates or the credit criteria starts to tighten up there. And then when those loans get more expensive, then usually community and regional banks, they're now more competitive because those prices go up.
And they are today.
Yep. And then from there, community banks, not so much because usually they're catering to the community and they're serving a slightly different market. Okay. So within that credit box, you have agencies, you have regionals, and then you have community banks. If, to your point, you know, you see this tsunami coming along, right? Okay, where would you, within those three banks, where would you spend your time calling into? Like, which banks would you be calling into, wanting to understand what their distressed portfolio looks like, right? Who's hemorrhaging the most? Who do you think is hemorrhaging the most? Maybe
the middle group is hemorrhaging the most right now. Fannie and Freddie are never going to hit the middle group. Your middle tier market regionals. Yeah, they're going to be hemorrhaging the most for now. Fannie and Freddie are fine. They're not hemorrhaging. They're smarter than that. They're just going to pull back. They always do. Your regionals, a lot of your balance sheet lenders, a lot of, that kind of lender has had a real hard time with COVID. The local community lenders are better off. They're better positioned in the moment. Now, the catch with them is they tend to offer a much, much lower amortization. That can make deals hard to underwrite with community bank, whereas, say, Fannie Mae, you might get 30-year amortization. You know, community bank, it might be 15 or 20. So that makes deals a little bit harder to get through underwriting with a community bank. The one thing people don't really stop and think about is the three kind of markets that you just described in debt. Well, Fannie and Freddie are multifamily. The middle tier, your regionals kind of swing through business and real estate, and your community banks lend on everything. Businesses and cars and your house and real estate. And when they get the real estate side of their balance sheet too stacked, they stop.
Yeah.
Fannie Freddie never stops. That they have a budget that they have set for the year, but they don't go lend on your car. They don't go lend on other stuff and then go, oh, we literally did too much real estate this year, so we better stop. Nope. But community bank will definitely do that. Community bank will say, hey, we did too many of this type of loan or that type of loan. We no longer have appetite for it. And that is so hard to see coming with community bank. You don't know. They won't tell you. One day you're going along, you're getting plenty of loans. That's great. One day you walk in and they go, yeah, we're good. We don't want to do anymore. What do you mean? They go, oh, yeah, we did too many. We're good.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you correctly, then, man, well, I mean, community banks, regional banks, they're regulated as well. I mean, they're regulated.
Absolutely.
So there's some predictability there, but usually that doesn't start. Usually what ends up happening is community banks, when there's some concern that we're getting into a potential crisis, then usually the regulators will come in and increase their capital requirements, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it sounds like that tightening up that you talked about, okay, and I'm playing devil's advocate.
Please, yeah.
Is really going to start with the agencies, but
Correct.
Haven't they already started doing that? I mean, last year they tightened
That's my point.
Did tons of refis, right? Refis out the door. But here's the crazy thing. So if you tighten up your underwriting criteria and you reduce your rate and you do all these refis and you give everybody a bunch of cash out, don't you think that cash now is going to go into maybe buying more deals and inflating prices?
It will. And that's exactly how we get into a bubble. And I think we're in the middle of one right now.
Okay. All right. Okay. Awesome, man.
Absolutely.
So I think that the broad conversation is great, right? Because it gives people perspective. All right.
Sure.
So now let's move to the U side of the equation. So in your formula, the SPY formula, I'm going to call this the SPY formula, Bill, because it makes it sound,
I love it.
It makes it sound a lot more, exciting, man. Okay.
I wish I had met you before I wrote the book then.
Let's get to the U side of the formula.
Sure.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that, man. So what are your comments on the U side of the equation?
Yeah. You try and limit risk and cash out of pocket. And that's kind of what I'm saying about these older buildings that we know are going to have this Capex tsunami hit. And we didn't even talk about politics. Now, if you're talking about older buildings in very very tenant-friendly areas, you're going to really have some double whammies. So if we're talking about New York and places like that are very tenant-friendly, the tenants are very empowered. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, no political comment. I'm just saying it's the truth. So in tenant-friendly
I like that political comment. The tenants are very empowered.
They are.
That's the first time I've heard that, man. I'm going to borrow that from you, Bill.
You have that, empowered tenants. Yeah.
That's classic, man.
So in the areas where they are empowering, I don't want to say all tenants are empowered because we certainly know most of them are not, but in the tenant-friendly states with older buildings, that's where you're going to have the highest risk margin. And it's those kind of properties. I don't want to go over to a traditional lender that if they foreclose is going to mess up my credit and my career. I don't want to do that kind of asset with that kind of loan. So that's the U part of it, is find areas that you can get into a property if it's risky without you spending a lot of money, having a lot of money, or risking an agency loan. If you go bankrupt, if you go into foreclosure with the agency debt, that's a career killer. So I don't want to go do these high risk, distressed assets with that kind of debt. I want seller financing. I want a lease option. I want that seller to join me as a partner in this deal. I didn't make that property distressed. I didn't put them in that situation. I am the solution. If they don't see me as a solution, that's fine. I'll go on and make another offer with someone that does.
Oh, okay.
Now,
go ahead, man.
You got to bring value. You got to bring value. You got to bring value to that seller. So don't get cocky.
Okay. So there's a little bit of a paradox there, right? Because on one end, so let me explain the paradox. On one end, you're saying, okay, the only way for me to offer up seller financing or to be able to secure an opportunity with seller financing is if the seller is very motivated, which usually implies that property is less marketable, right? It's going to appeal to a smaller buyer pool. Okay. And usually the reasons for that, property usually will have some type of challenge with it that a very small buyer pool is willing to take on. All right. And of course it becomes unfinanceable, right? To a conventional lender. Many times those type of deals, they're insurance related challenges. Okay. So that's one side of the equation. So here's the paradox. The paradox now comes in where, you have a challenge or a problematic property, right? Your comment earlier was, hey, look, I don't want to put myself in a position with a lender, especially in a market like this, where I'm going to run the risk of blowing up my portfolio. Okay. So consequently now I'm going to use seller financing, right? Okay. The paradox is in this market, there are not very many of those deals.
Agreed.
Okay. On either side of the equation, right? So because of that, right, you can't, as a business, we can't just sit idle and not do anything. Otherwise we go out of business. So in an ideal world, I can say, oh man, gosh, this is absolutely crazy. Let me just wait 10 years until the market blows up and then I can go and start buying again.
Yeah.
But because we don't live in an ideal world, or actually maybe we do if you look at it like that, we have to continuously find ways to evolve as business people and find opportunity, right? And so I'm always of the belief, man, that there's always an unlimited supply of opportunity. Sometimes we just need to change the way we think a little bit to be able to see that, right? See through a different lens. So with that being said, what is your comment? You know, what's your comment there?
There's no crying in commercial real estate. There's no crying in commercial real estate. Put the big girl pants on and get to work. It doesn't matter, man. It doesn't matter. Go to work. Get out there and find that deal. You know, the closing table does not care.
I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You close or you don't. I will. I hope I see you out there. You know, but if you go sit around and make excuses, I'll eat your lunch. I don't care. You hit on it. It's a numbers game. Is always opportunity. It's how hard are you willing to go out and look for it? Are you going to go out and look at 2 or 3 deals and then sit back and cry and say, oh, there's no deals out here? Or are you going to go look at 300 deals and find one? You know, I can tell you everything you need to know about real estate in one sentence. Know the values in your area and look at more deals than the competition. That's it. If you know what something's worth and you just outpace the competition, you'll find deals. I don't care what the market says or what debt says or what anybody tells you.
Okay, and I agree with that.
You can do it.
With some caveats to that. So now here's where the caveat comes in, okay? The caveat comes in into how you communicate a message, whether to your seller or to the broker, right? And that obviously you can play the numbers game, but my hope is that as you gain more experience, right, you become smarter at what you spend your time on because you know what can close and what can't. And you know where you're going to be competitive and where you're not going to be competitive. So with that being said, how now do we take the SPY formula, okay, so the seller, property, and you formula, and put that in the form of an offer to be able to have a higher hit rate when you do find a deal? So give me an example of what that offer looks like. I can be your, we can role play, man. I can be your seller if you want, but give me an example of what that offer looks like so we can start bringing this all together.
All right. Well, I would want to find out. I'd say, okay, John, tell me, do you have a mortgage on the property right now, or do you own it free and clear?
I have a mortgage on it. But here's the good news, Bill. The good news is I bought this thing 12 years ago. And I put a lot of money down. I paid off about 10 years worth of principal and, relatively low loan to value, probably 30% loan to value, small loan on it at this point.
Excellent. So that right there would tell me one of two things. If you have a loan that can't be easily paid off, we need to take seller financing off the table because you cannot give interest that doesn't exist. You can't give me seller financing if you currently have financing. Now, people do stuff like subject to and wraps and things that they call that, but that's not truly what that is. So right there, I would say, all right, John, so let's really take a look at your loan balance. Perhaps I can bring enough cash in the form of a down payment that you can go and pay that loan off. I've actually done that before. And so then you carry back the remainder of the loan. That would be a possibility. Now, if you said, hey, I bought this thing 2 years ago and we know you're leveraged to the hilt and you're underwater, then I'm going to immediately move to something like a master lease option. That would be what I would offer in that scenario. And that's a little more of a complicated offer, but that's where I come in and basically rent the property from you with the right to buy it someday in the future. It's a lease to own sort of scenario. So it would really be depending on what your debt was. And then next I would say, hey, why are you selling? What's your motivation? Why you want out of here?
Okay. So why would someone be willing to take on the risk of a lease option with an operator, right? Essentially master lease in place, right? You're subletting from me for the right to lease up the property at a predetermined price. So as an operator, why would I do that? And I'm again playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
What's in it for me? What's in it for me?
Yeah.
I know what's
you
in
might
it for
be
you.
dumb. You might be dumb. That would be the first answer. Is you might not be smart enough to know not to do it. Number one. Hopefully that's not the answer. Hopefully you as the operator have enough of a resume that you can show this seller that you're not an idiot, you're not new to the business, and you're a safer bet. If you're listening to this and you don't currently have a resume, well, then you might want to start trying to find a partner that does bring some of that experience. So for me, if I came to you and said, John, I want to do a lease option with you, and you said, why would I do that? I'd say, well, because you allowed the property to do, whatever that we've decided this made up issue is. And then I would show you my resume, my experience, and say, see, I have a track record of changing this, and doing these things that you didn't do. And I've got a track record of that. And that's why you should do it with me. But let's be clear, it's sales. You're selling yourself. That's the answer. And you can either sell yourself or you can't. And not everyone is going to want to do a lease option. They're not. It's a numbers game.
So here's some of the benefits, okay, with a lease option to the seller from what I've learned personally.
Sure.
Is, if they still want to capture an income stream, it's a great option. It's almost like a note, with the exception of the fact, very similar. And they also can retain the rights to depreciate the property, right?
Correct.
So some really good benefits. And nowadays with the advantage of accelerating depreciation and the very inexpensive cost to do that, that's a great presentation. I mean, that's a value-added presentation, right?
Right. So usually it's a burned out landlord, I find, most often will do this.
Okay, cool. So there was a property that I own. I purchased it, I think it was 2 years ago, man, maybe 3. I think it was about 3 years ago, okay? Mm-hmm. And when I was buying the property, because I wasn't really sure on the market at that point, part of my exit strategy was to lease it to a senior living facility that was right in the area, either sell it to them.
Excellent.
Or initially when I bought it, I go, you know what? I wonder if I could turn around and just lease this property to them. I felt that it made sense because they would be willing to pay me more than actually market rents. Because when I look at what they were charging for their rooms, and their rooms are horrible, man. I mean, their rooms were not that great, and I was shocked. They're charging $3,000 for a room, and it included some accommodations. And this property was maybe 2 miles away, right? Maybe a little bit less than that. And so I go, okay, well, I can either sell them the property as a potential exit, okay? Or I could, potentially lease the property to them and have do the lease up work. I would just be responsible for improving the asset and getting it to the point where it's market ready for them, right? And I was okay with that. It turns out though, man, that property ended up being a really big success. So I didn't need to do that, but that's where I was initially going as an alternative, just in the event that the property didn't perform under our initial plan, right? Because I didn't know the market very well.
Yeah. And I've broken down all those things in my book. I go through all the reasons why a seller would do it, tax benefits, and, we get into a lot of that kind of stuff. We don't have time to sit here and read the book today, but all of those topics are in there, and I've covered all that in detail. Really a whole list of why would a seller even do this?
Yes.
There's a lot of that.
Well, man, I really appreciate you. This has been a great conversation, especially in this market.
Appreciate it. Yeah, this is good.
I mean, this is a phenomenal conversation, a lot of value, a lot of golden nuggets.
Thank you.
Inside of this. So for that, Bill, I want to thank you, man. You've been a gracious.
I appreciate it. No, thank you.
Yeah, gracious guest. And so, hey, what's the best way for our audience to find you?
Absolutely. Well, the book, that's Creative Cash. That's on Amazon. You can reach out to me directly. My email is bill@gobroadwell.com, and that's Broadwell, Broadwell. Website, 2 different websites, depending on what you're after. I have a master seller financing masterclass, a downloadable masterclass on creative financing, and that's at creativeapartmentdeals.com. It's a little bit long. creativeapartmentdeals.com. That's our masterclass if you're looking for more sort of education on what we do. And then my partner and I have another website, and that is Broadwell Property Group. So if you're an investor and you're looking to do business with us, go check us out at Broadwell Property Group. We've got a little section there you can fill out, and we'll be in touch with you directly. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Information, book, creativeapartmentdeals.com. And if you want to do business with us, that's broadwellpropertygroup.com. Looking forward to hearing from everybody.
Awesome, bud. Really appreciate you sharing that. Hey, and then finally, what is the one question that you have of me that you think you can add some value to our audience, since I've been asking you questions for the last?
What's a good question to ask you? Yeah. Can you have me back on another episode?
Man, of course.
No, but I tell you what, I do want to say, you're one of the only people that has actually asked truly challenging questions. And I really appreciate that. I love the other side of the point of view. I love it when somebody will do something besides just sit here and go, oh yeah, you're great. This is great. The book's great. Now, come on, let's have a debate. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I love it. This is one of the best conversations I've had on one of these shows. And so I really appreciate your realness and keeping it real and having the bravado to actually challenge one of your speakers. I love it. I appreciate it. And this has made some really good content.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I look forward to having another conversation. So that is another invitation back.
There you go. That's what that is. Have me back. Yeah. This has been great, really.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks so much, man. I wish you continued success. Pleasure. And by the way, again, you're now an official member of the We Build Great Apartment Communities extended network of smart investors. So if I can help you with something, I can connect you with others that can.
Please do.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Take care.
Take care.
Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.